In this video of the Better Photography Weekly Challenge, we will be discussing the winners and honorable mention of the contest, the other end of the age. Our judge and mentor is Raghav Pasricha. He is an Indian freelance photographer who works across multiple genres, including documentary, portraiture, architecture, and advertising. Based in New Delhi, he received an MPhil in 2015 by the Department of Sociology, Delhi School of Economics. Over the years, he interned with development sector organizations, including the India Alliance for Child Rights and KRIA, a feminist human rights organization. In 2019, he was invited to design and implement a curriculum to teach mobile photography in schools across the national capital. Since 2020, he has been documenting the closure and destruction of Central Vista in New Delhi, with the aim of building an archive that explores the relationship between the erasure of democratic ideals and the destruction of public space. He also attended the documentary practice and visual journalism program at ICP, New York, as the recipient of the ICP Directors Fellowship and was a participant for Eddie Adams Workshop 34. Hello and welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me here. Before I really get into, who won and who lost and whatever, even if that's even a topic of discussion, what I would like to really talk about is how one goes about selecting, or in this case, judging a set of images that get submitted on a topic. And I think it might be interesting or hopefully interesting for some of you to understand that this winning and losing is not a absolute statement on the quality of your photograph or its ability to say what you intended for it to say. It could very well be my inability to understand or my inability to listen to what you had to say. That having been said, I think one of the things I grappled with when I started looking at the entries were that there were some entries that had observed a fairly poignant relationship between animals and people. And there were others that had crafted or used a tremendous sense of aesthetics, perhaps, to communicate a relationship between animals and people, but had not really observed that relationship in the moment of the photograph. Invariably, the ones that I've chosen as winners for me had either a great balance or had both elements present, where there was a sense of aesthetics and crafting, which communicated that relationship, and there was an observation of the moment of a connection between people and animals. So many of these photographs that you see, which are, say, in honorable mentions or or perhaps not even in the honorable mentions, they're not necessarily bad photographs. What happens is that there is a certain limitation that a theme poses to a selector or a judge. That theme becomes maybe like a heading on an essay assignment or on an answer that you're giving at an exam, to give you a bad analogy. And a photograph then necessarily appears like a sentence or a paragraph, if you will, or maybe just a word. The elements in your photograph are part of a grammar. They're part of a syntax. So if I toss words on a page, I could possibly assemble them into a sentence, but they don't necessarily become a sentence. Some of the photographs that we see, and I'm not talking about the one by Alok over here, this is a very well-formed, very well thought out, rather poetic sentence about, the grandeur of monuments, relationships, time, a river, the bond between a man and a dog, a certain kind of kindness, a certain sense of beauty and time of day. It's got many, many elements to it. but perhaps it also has just a few too many elements to it. So I wouldn't say that this could not have been a winner. It could absolutely be a winner. And if perhaps the heading that I had was different, if I was judging or asked to select photographs on an idea about a sense of history or time or the flow of time, I may have looked at this photograph very differently. But when I thought about the other end of the leash, what I find is that this particular photograph or this particular sentence has many ideas that go above and beyond what I was asked to select. And there were others that spoke perhaps more directly to the theme, or they spoke sometimes more emotionally to the theme, by even if they weren't perhaps as well crafted, they weren't as eloquent in what they were trying to say. So let's just see some more entries. Um, Again, I mean, if I could see one more, and then I can maybe talk about two together. So why I wanted to see perhaps one more photograph was because what you'll begin to notice in this selection, hopefully, is that there is a sense of mood, that there is a sense of emotion that comes through the photographs, and that not always are the elements that make up the photograph the same. There's not necessarily a person always present. There is a sense of life, and there is a sense of an animal's life and its connection to the world. Um, what I would encourage you, or hope that you do, as you participate in more and more competitions or submit your photographs for publication, or maybe just continue to take photographs for yourself above all, is that you begin to think about, in very, very sharp terms, what is it that conveyed a sense or a feeling or an idea or a memory to you when you observe the world. I think I have more in common with the people who are not today's winners than I do with the people who are the winners today. I think a bulk of projects, photographs, essays that I've tried to make or made have failed. They've missed the mark. And I've been told that in no uncertain terms by people whose work I respect, by people who've taught me, by people who were either, carrying some of my work or using it. And that I believe is part and parcel of the process, where you try and say something through the grammar and syntax of a photograph, and very often you don't hit the mark. But I have spent some time trying to think about what is it that makes certain photographs effective. So there is a sense of emphasis that you can lay on the subject, and emphasis comes in many forms. I'm not going to give you a 101 of how to make the subject prominent in your photograph, but maybe it would be interesting for some of you or all of you to think about ideas of graphic weight, to think about how exposure is used, how what is the role of brightness in a photograph, what is perhaps the role of something like leading lines. And there are many people that really have mastered that art, at all age groups, where they can make you encounter and look at a subject with sort of this unerring accuracy. So if I look at the photographs by Shamim and by Pabitra, the one that comes next, there is a sense of light which lays emphasis on the subject. There is the use of lines that guide me to that subject. But what that composition is the word that's often used, or framing. But effectively, it is really about how do you present what you were seeing within the bounds of a frame, you know, within a two-dimensional space. In both these photographs, there is a clarity to what I'm supposed to, or what is the intention of the photograph, what I'm supposed to see, or what is the intention of the photograph. And that clarity of intent, that clarity of uh, vision, also I suspect and I believe from my own attempts at making photographs, comes from a clarity of observation and experience. So I can share with you some of the lines that have stuck with me uh, from, endless hours on YouTube, watching interviews with a lot of photographers. Um, so there's Peter Van Agtemel who said that, when you go out being vulnerable. And that vulnerability will allow you access to spaces and to people's lives where you are not threatening. But part of what that vulnerability will do will also be to make you somewhat more sensitive to what you're seeing. It'll perhaps provoke you into questioning, to experiencing with a little more intensity what you're encountering. Um, my favorite line on about this challenge of photography, where you have to observe and feel very intensely, comes from Eugene Richards, where he said that every time you go out, every time I go out, he said it for himself, I hope that I go out empty. And when you go out empty, or as he explained it, you go out with the desire to make photographs, with the desire to experience or understand some part of the world, or some part of the life that you are living, or some part of what is on offer outside, even if you don't have a clear or rather philosophical intention about what you're doing. And you can then begin to appreciate or enjoy or really thrive on what you begin to find. And that will invariably, I mean, of course, I could sit here and tell you rule of thirds, frame along certain guidelines, meter for light correctly, get correct exposure. But to be honest, a lot of photographs that I love are not technically correct exposure. They are not, scientifically the perfect exposure. They are often incorrect or very exaggerated levels of contrast, or very muted levels of contrast. And but what they do is they take me very close to understanding what the person saw, what they felt. And that really is where the magic is for me. When I know that somebody's seen something, and because they have seen it so well, I can see it too, I can feel some part of it too. So the aesthetics and the grammar of photography are simply a way for you to say what you want to say. Don't toss a bunch of words onto a page and hope that it will become a sentence. Don't toss a bunch of elements into a frame and hope that they will become a photograph. Um, Push for that clarity in experience the same way you would with underlining in a sentence, or perhaps deleting something that you've misspelled. So I'll explain that a little, as we go on. Can we look at some more photographs, perhaps? Again, this is one of the entries that I loved by Arun Saha from Pune. Um, for me, it has a lot going on, but it also has an enormous clarity to perhaps both the closeness of a relationship, somewhat its cruelty also. Um, and because it's been executed with a certain degree of finesse, but not devoid of feeling. It's not clinical. It's not just craft. it's got emotion, what it helps me do is then retreat into my own imagination. I don't have to do the hard work of saying, what am I looking at? I know what I'm looking at. I know what Arun perhaps felt. I can imagine it. But then I can also begin to imagine, what do I feel? And that is one of the great things about photography, or that's the great thing about communicating, perhaps, that you could read a beautiful line of poetry, you can look at a photograph, you can look at a painting, and it'll allow you to think a little more about your own feelings. It'll allow you to delve a little deeper into yourself or into whatever in the world matters to you. So, you know, well done, Arun, and well done all the other people whose photographs we've seen. Um, for me, this was one of the nicest photographs that I saw uh, in the whole submission. And I would, really, my heart goes out to Deepro Biswas from Kolkata for having seen it. I would say, keep seeing, keep going out there. I don't know what you'll find. I think this says a lot about the world that we live in. But in the same breath, I will say that what you did was you found a great set of words to make a sentence. You found a great set of elements to make a photograph. And then, as happens with so many of us, I have a feeling that you could have refined that sentence. You could have refined this photograph. Now, when I say refined, you can watch you can do a Udemy course. You can watch a bunch of YouTube videos on how to edit a photograph. And what you'll find is a million ways to control the elements of color, contrast, light, sharpness, etc., etc. And there's really, the sky is the limit on that. While you learn that technology and while you learn the software and while you learn that craft, please remember that there is always a certain aesthetic that is true to you, which may or may not conform to the method that you're learning. I end up re-editing almost every photograph that I take across years. The reason is my understanding of what my aesthetic is still evolving, it's still changing, and I hope that it continues to change for quite a while. But at the same time, my control of using both the act of shooting and the act of making a photograph, along with the softwares that allow me to process and render that photograph, are evolving. I can refine my use of light in a software today far better than I could 3 years back. I can make a photograph with a better understanding of how I wanted the light today than I could 3 years back. And if I think about a lot of the photographers whose work I admire, they say that they have been doing it for decades, and it's still true. That decades later, they're still making photographs that are able to say something better than when they started out. So it's not a process that has an end goal, but at some point you will get to the point where you can, to a certain degree of satisfaction, hopefully say what you wanted to say. So here you've seen something really well. But what I'd like you to question, quite aside of my perspective and judgment, is, were you able to refine it to the T? Were you able to get the most out of having seen this wonderful moment? So we can carry on from here. And that's a great example, I think, of being able to have a lot of clarity about what you wanted to say, how you wanted to say it, and executing it. I mean, there will be, I'm sure there are going to be people who are going to look at this photograph and say, wow. There are going to be equal number of people who are going to look at it and say, the highlights could be better controlled. You could have diffused XYZ thing better or whatever. I mean, frankly, for me, I don't care. I loved it. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it's in a way somewhat contemporary. It's gritty. It's edgy. It's got all the elements of fun. But above all, it takes me to that moment of looking at a cat and messing with it. Uh, it's something that I guess hopefully everyone's tried once, and maybe gotten smacked by a cat for doing it. But this is really the stuff that you go out for. Not to mess with cats, but to experience certain things and be able to say them. So let's move on to the next category, and I can, maybe give you a few more ideas that came across my head. Yep. Smartphones. So, as I was saying, many of you who submitted photographs had a really gentle and empathetic observation of life. But as is the challenge of really all language and photography too, uh, your observation has to translate into an expression. And here the expression is great, but it's also being let down perhaps by the technology at use. So when I'm not saying go run out and buy a very expensive camera and a lens, but be cognizant of how colors are saturating, or how a photograph is falling apart because of certain settings. There's blurring or pixelation. But that has no bearing really, beyond a point, by the way, on whether this is a good photograph or not. I hope, Udayan, you go out and make many, many more photographs, because undoubtedly you have something that drives you or you feel when you look at the world. So the spontaneity of a smartphone is great, as are its limitations very often, by the way. But when you use it within those limitations, try and take a bit of time to see how you can, you know, uh, control the photograph a little better. But yeah, don't let go of what you're feeling because you're trying to control so much about it. Let's look at a few more, maybe two more. Right. And these two are a great point to actually get to the final thing that I have to say to you guys, which is that there is the whole idea of the syntax or the grammar. There is the whole idea of identification and expression and observation. And then there is that extra layer. So why are there certain photographers who become, legends and masters of the craft and whatever? It's because they make photographs that, uh, to use a line that's not mine, become more than the sum of their parts. They begin to say a lot more about the human condition, or they begin to say a lot more about the world that we live in. One of the ways in which they do that very often is the use of metaphor. It's also a trope that exists in poetry and literature, but in photography as well. And when you bring the elements of your craft, when you bring the sensitivity of your observation, and you marry it to something like metaphor, what you can do is elevate the experience of a viewer from being just, oh, how pretty or how beautiful, to, oh my God, that moment of wonder, that moment of realization that you've just seen something that you, as a viewer, could not have seen. And therein, perhaps, is what makes you a photographer, or makes you a writer, or makes you a storyteller, whatever you want to call yourself. You want to call yourself an artist. Fine. But it is that elevation of the everyday or the extraordinary through your observation, through your practice, through your abstraction, that elevates the experience of somebody else. It enhances maybe their understanding, maybe their empathy, maybe their anguish. And I think both the photographs that we see have a certain sense of metaphor. They take a very banal experience or an ordinary experience, and through the grammar of a photograph, of light, of shadows, of form, they say a little more. And my, heartfelt congratulations to both these people that they were able to see metaphor in their everyday life. And I would encourage all of you to maybe delve a little deeper and think about what happens when you see a shadow, or what happens when you see a spot of light, what happens when you see a reflection. And very often, as kids, we're far more curious about a distorted image. We're far more curious about a shadowy figure. We're far more curious about a very, very bright, glowing object. And somewhere along the line, we begin to lose some of that joy. I'm well on my way to losing all kinds of joy, I believe now. But I hope that all of you retain it. So let's look at the last few photographs, and maybe we can just wrap it up then. I mean, really fabulous. I mean, this is one of the photographs that I really loved. I loved a lot of what you guys submitted. I was put under limitation on how many winners and honorable mentions, etc. I could select. But yeah, I tried very, very hard to look at each photograph with my complete attention and think about what the person was trying to say to me. But I would like to say is that why this photograph and many others actually stand out above the average submission is because I didn't have to try. And the cruel reality of photography or any kind of, I suppose, communication is that not everyone is going to bother to, spend the time and think about what you're trying to say. Either you're going to say it well enough for everyone to sit up and take notice, or you're not. And have a really thick skin, and also feel free to say that, okay, somebody's just, they don't get it. They don't get what I'm saying. And that it takes a bit because, competitions and publications and platforms and media channels or whatever you want to, wherever your goal is, they do control an audience. They control the ability of your work to be seen. So you can't be totally oblivious of, say, a photo editor or a judge or a publication, or whoever's reviewing your work. You can't say, okay, everyone's not getting it, I'm a genius. Maybe you are, but at some point, yeah, you have to figure out, is your genius being communicated effectively enough? And in this case, I mean, I'm not talking about genius, but I am talking about the fact that, is your experience being communicated effectively? And in this photograph as well, I get exactly where the person is. I don't have to spend 10 minutes thinking, okay, they saw something, they're using a smartphone. I'm not caveating what I'm looking at. I'm looking at something and enjoying it just for what I'm seeing. So it's a cruel reality. I wish it were different. I wish it were different for me as it would be different for you. But it's perhaps what draws us in to do this as a hobby, as a passion, as a profession. And with each of those, from hobby, passion, and profession, the degree of risk you encounter and the degree of failure you encounter will keep rising. And I wish you all the luck, and I hope all of you wish me all the luck as well, because I'm in the same boat. So yeah, great example of somebody who's got their aesthetics clear. They know what they want to do. Now, whether I agree with it or not doesn't matter. Deepro knows what he wanted to say. That's most of the battle won. because there will be somebody who will look at Deepro's photograph and say, this is everything I wanted to see with birds on water. This is my experience of birds on water. And when Deepro finds that person, Deepro will be a very happy photographer. Uh, so congratulations to Pabitra. Um, I've talked about this photograph, and really, continue shooting is all I'll say to all the winners. Let's just cycle through the winners of this category. Again, we've discussed this one. Congratulations, Bhavesh. It was a pleasure looking at your work, and I hope you continue doing lots more of this. And to Arun, I hope you see as much of life as you've seen in this photograph again and again and again. Congratulations to Pritam, and really a lovely sense of the ordinary, but the extraordinary that exists within it. Please travel lots is all I'll say to you. Balaiya, I hope you really take time to travel and have the opportunity to travel. I do feel, as you go through different geographies and landscapes, that this goes for a lot of you, but especially for this photograph, I think you'll find something wonderful in the strangeness of new places. And Deepro, I think you have many entries, many with a great, hit rate, if that's a fair word to use. But I would say that you're dabbling in both sides of it, black and white and color, and you're doing really some interesting images with both. I wouldn't say choose. I don't think I think in photography, we are at the point where we can use every tool possible to speak about the subject, color or black and white or other formats as well. But I think it's a lot more work to be able to control multiple formats than to do one. And I do really enjoy your use of color in this particular instance. So I would hope to see lots more color photographs from you, from Kolkata and across India and across the world. So congratulations to all the winners. Thank you so much for sending in your work. I've tried to put down my thoughts. I've tried to give you an insight into how I selected and what I thought. You can find me on Instagram under my name, Raghav.Pasricha. And I would be more than happy to share my experiences or look at photographs that you have, but also to any of you who want to study photography. I've been fortunate enough to, of course, initially be self-taught and do that for a long time, but also to attend institutions that help me learn photography. So if any of you want to ever apply, figure things out, find opportunities where you can really, really perhaps learn things that you're struggling with, it's a pretty open offer. I have benefited greatly from the help of others, and while I can't really teach you anything, I can help you figure out how to apply to places that do have the wherewithal to do that. So really feel free to message me on Instagram. I may sometimes take a bit of time, but I promise to get back to everyone who does send me a message about anything. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nilofa, and thank you, Better Photography. And I hope to, hope all of you keep making better and better photographs.